Okay, good. So I was scrolling through Reddit last week when I came across this post, which rearranges every plane's BR in the entire game based on its production month. Now, the person who made this post and who gave me permission to use his ridiculous amounts of work for this video includes why doing this would be such a bad idea. But is it really? And that's what we're going to explore today. Now, there's a lot of information here. Every plane in the game, in fact, that we're going to have to break down. We need an easy way to do that. And I know you all know what this is, an overused tier list chart. This is what we're going to be using today with a bit of a twist. We'll be ranking the viability and effectiveness of the different nations' tech trees after this supposed BR change. And since War Thunder is aircraft from many different eras of air combat, we're gonna have to break this down even further than what it already is. So we're gonna have to split this up into 3 different sections: pre-war, World War II, and post-war. Let's get into it. Now, because Germany invaded Poland in 1939 and quite late into that year, we're actually gonna round up and say that World War II started in 1940. So that starts at BR 1.7. And this is where all new players get their bearings in the game. This is where everybody started off with, right? At low tier. And what would they see? Well, honestly, it's not that different from what you would see in a normal game. Everything's pretty accurate, and holy shit, why is there a Spitfire at 1.3? Now, as far as the rest of Britain goes, they're still pretty booty until the Battle of Britain, but that Spitfire dragged them up a considerable amount, so A tier. America stays about the same, Sweden stays about the same, and Israel just doesn't exist yet. Now, Germany also gets a 109E1 that goes from 2.3 down to 1.3, but since the Brewster Buffalo, the I-16, and some of the Baguette fighters kind of do the same thing, they all sort of cancel out. However, the bombers do give them a slight boost, so A tier for Germany. And while we're here, we'll give it to France for the same reason. Now for the really atrocious stuff. Some of the paper airplanes, like the I-16 Type 27 with the wing-mounted 20 mils and the Chaika, go from a 3.4 down to 1.3 or 1.7. Now, would this change inadvertently cause 109s to actually use their historical tactics of boom and zoom and superior dive speed to kill some of these I-16s and Chaikas? Yes, it would. Are new players who are just 2 hours into the game experienced enough to know what the hell I'm talking about? No. S tier. In the same vein, we'll go to the 2 countries who are actually at war already by 1939, and China has 20 millimeters at 1.3 on an I-16.
Why do they have that at 1.3?
Like, I get that there may have been maybe a dozen of them, but that does not tell the whole story now, does it? And this whole thing just causes China, on paper, to probably be the best pre-war nation of all of the tech trees. And with the exception of the Atsu, Japan kind of sucks. So much for Calc and Goal.
My historical accuracy.
D tier. Oh, and Italy is pretty mid. B. Okay, starting the World War II section, we have Israel. We have Israel, where... Oh, there they are. I mean, probably competitive at the beginning, but kind of boring and gets smoked later on. D tier. Now let's look at our previous leaders, starting with China. And oh man, that's a lot of red. So yeah, it looks like they start off pretty weak and don't really compete from 2.3 through 5.7 when they steal a Ki-61. They do finish pretty strong with their very good P-47 and a set of P-51s, but C tier. Now, Russia doesn't really take that early dip like China does, as their attackers more than make up for their lack of early fighters. And honestly, they probably have the best balance of fighters, bombers, and new ground strike attack aircraft of any nation on paper. And not to mention that the PE-8 goes down to 2.0. But they sort of get their shit rocked at the end, so A tier. For France, with the exception of the MB-162 going down from 5.0 to 2.3, they're kind of boring. Who would have guessed that from France? And while they do have a really good P-63, their country looked like this during the period, so you can't really blame them. D tier, moving on. Germany. Germany is clinically effective at almost every BR in this era. They dominate in the early war with their only real competitor being Great Britain, and I wonder why. And they always seem to be one step ahead of the United States, making better versions while the US is still catching up to the BR before it. And yeah, it does get extremely sweaty during the mid-war period, but their 262s, and honestly what's the bigger deal, is their ME-163s, going from 8.0 down to 6.3, which to be fair would make a more competitive fight for them, as those fighters can actually compete with their absurd turn rate. You'd actually have to play it as it was intended, as a bomber killer. I mean, imagine that. And I'm debating about where I want this one, but S tier. Now, Italy is an interesting one because their country also looks like this about halfway through the war. However, and I know this is controversial, but Italy had the best and most well-rounded fighter aircraft of all of World War II. They start off pretty dang competitive with the RA 2001, and while I do find it a bit ridiculous that it takes them 2 years to put 20 mils on the things, they get the RA 2005 at the same time that the US gets
The joke is they got nothing.
the G55 and the G56 are ridiculous, and I might be a bit biased with this list, so screw it, it's my list. A tier. Japan completely outclasses the United States in the early part of the war with their Zeros, but they still get their shit kicked by Great Britain, and lets the US kind of catch up midway through. They are very well rounded with their Raidens. I have circle jokes. And they suffer from Germany's success of having the early jets. Fun fact, they're also tied with the J-22B and the Sutherland with having the biggest up tier in the Key 109 Fireball. That's the nickname I gave the thing. But I'm going A tier because they get the jets a year after Germany does. And speaking of Great Britain and the Sutherland, they start off incredibly strong, but it slowly falls off with some of the worst up tiers in the entire list. The Mosquito is near obsolete, and they go for long stints with no fighters at all. But I do want to point out that they get the Gloucester Meteor before Germany gets their 262s. So mid B tier. All right, and that leaves Sweden and the United States. It leaves the United States. And let's be real here, if Germany is an S tier, the US is kind of mid. They get outclassed at nearly every turn by the Axis powers. And their big redeeming quality is their bombers, which I'm not a huge fan of. But they aren't as bad as Great Britain, so A tier. Moving on to post-war. Now, this is a very broad area of nearly 70 years, so it's best to be well-rounded in this tech area. Countries recovering from annihilation might struggle, as Germany definitely does in the early stages. Now, they do benefit from getting tech from both sides, because their country looked like this, but they also seem to get things later at a slightly worse quality than the home nations, so it's going to be B tier. Now, Japan is very similar, but is so incredibly boring after 1945 that it shouldn't even be in consideration. But this stupid F-16 saves it from despair. C tier. Italy is another one of these nations, although their Sagittario is actually balanced now. Too many F-104s, nothing crazy competitive at top BR. D tier. And totally switching gears, we have the United States. Is this a question? They are competitive from so early and just remain that way. And I would fucking love it if IL-28s and H5s had to deal with fucking F4s. Oh my god, I would love that so much. I hate those things. Check out this link up here. S tier. And Great Britain. Still to this day, I don't think I've ever been killed by a meteor. They are trash, but might actually be competitive now for an entire 3.0 range. Wow, incredible. Yeah, they really only get missile platforms, and I still think that most of Great Britain's Air Force in War Thunder could just be replaced with a single AA site, and it would still be more fun than flying them. With the obvious exception, of course, being the Harrier, which is both competitive and enjoyable, so B tier, I guess. And Russia seems like a shoo-in for another S tier, but I don't know, it's just not quite there. Their MiG-21s are pretty outclassed by the Tomcat, and I think there was a 10-to-1 KD for the F4 in Vietnam. I mean, that just speaks for itself. They have some modern stuff, which are enjoyable, but I don't know, in my mind, their fighters get outclassed before they were even produced by some of these American ones. And the existing battle ratings seem to agree. So, A tier. Oh my gosh, I can't believe my eyes. Israel isn't awful. They are actually quite competitive and fun at this very specific battle rating. Sweden is nearly the exact same, really severely outclassed early on and then pretty decent. They probably don't win the top tier fights too much, but they are in them, unlike Israel. A tier for both of those, I guess. Okay, and we'll go to another country that adds absolutely nothing to the game until high tier jets. China! I mean, you sort of get the best and the worst of both worlds here. Competitive, but kind of boring, and missing something that is truly top tier right now, so A tier. But last, and certainly least, we have France. And honestly, for as much as I rag on them, they're actually not too bad with their jets. And yes, that does physically hurt me to say. Low tier, they're competitive, their Mirages are very enjoyable and can hold their own, and the Mirage 2000s are just beasts. A tier. Lots of A tiers. And with that, here are your final rankings. If you have any comments about it or any recommendations to better this list, there's actually a section for that under this video. Let me know what you're thinking. I do read every comment, despite what people say it does to my mental health. But I do appreciate everybody who leaves a comment, even if they're negative, because you do help me out. So that is what that is. If you're still watching, you've actually already done a great thing for this video. And if you'd like more in the future, you can always subscribe and help me hit my goal of 20,000 subscribers, which I've been working on for like 5 or 6 years now. So yeah, thanks again to the original Reddit poster who let me use his tons of work for this. And link to that is down below if you guys want to check it out. Okay, that's enough for me. Adios.